Welcome to this traffic safety webinar sponsored by the North Carolina Governor's Highway Safety Program. This is one in a series of webinars addressing topics of interest for traffic safety professionals. The series is co-hosted by the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State University. Today's topic is law enforcement interaction and communication with people who have hearing loss. Our presenters are Donna Platt and Martina Moore-Reid. Donna is the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator with the North Carolina Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. She has more than 20 years of experience providing consultation, training resources, and collaboration with emergency responders and 911 telecommunicators in North Carolina and in Washington State. Her area of focus is effective communication in 911 technologies and throughout all phases of emergency management. Donna has both professional and personal experiences with emergency events since 2016, including Hurricanes Matthew and Florence and a FEMA COVID-19 vaccination site. She is currently involved in numerous work groups in the North Carolina Emergency Management's Human Services Branch and serves as the National Emergency Number Association's Accessibility Committee co-chair. Martina is a community accessibility specialist with the Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. She has been in this role for more than 17 years, providing advocacy, consultation, and training to agencies and individuals. She is also involved in several nonprofit organizations to talk about safety and train law enforcement paramedics, 911 operators, and local emergency preparedness workers about effective communications with deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind communities. Martina also serves on the board of the National Black Deaf Advocates Organization and is director of its Black Deaf Senior Citizens Program. So welcome, Donna and Martina, and we may now begin your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Donna. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this webinar. We've been looking forward to bringing this presentation to you all, and we're really honored to be here. Before I proceed, I did want to make a comment about the sign language interpreters. We'll have one on screen at all time. So if you have hidden non-participant videos, then you will only see the one interpreter, and then another interpreter will come on in about 15 minutes. If you make a comment using your voice, they'll sign for us. And as you can see, when we sign, they'll put what we're saying into English so you can understand. But do recognize that they will be taking turns throughout the presentation. Both Martina and myself are deaf. So before we proceed, I wanted to share a poll and just kind of get a sense of your experience in working with those who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind. Okay, I see the poll has been posted.
Donna, we seem to have stabilized at about 66% participation. If you'd like to go ahead and share the results. Oh, would that be okay?
Sure, yes.
All right, I will end the poll and then share the results.
Okay, I'm just going to take a moment to make note of those. This is Donna. Okay, thank you so much for sharing your responses on the poll. And it seems like about 64% of you participated, so thank you for taking the time to do that. So it seems like of those who participated, 75% of you have interacted with somebody with hearing loss while in a professional situation. So that's great, but about 25% of you have not. And that entails if you've communicated with the person, either the passenger or the driver. It seems like 69% have written notes back and forth, 50% have used gestures, some use lip reading, about 25%, though nobody was using finger spelling or knows American Sign Language. And then about 19% have not encountered a driver or passenger with hearing loss. With the driver's communication card, how many of you have seen it? I find it interesting to see that 81% of participants have not seen that before. That's a great tool, and I'll talk about that later. Then that final question, are you familiar with the hearing loss symbol on the driver's license? And interestingly, 75% of the participants say they have not seen it. So that is another thing that I'll show you later in the presentation. Okay, thank you so much. And now we're going to proceed with our webinar. Next slide, please. This slide, like Eugene was talking before, is the beginning of one of our interactive questions. So I would like you to type your answer in the chat box. So based on the poll, 75 of you who answered have experienced working with either a driver or a passenger who has hearing loss. So I'm wondering if those of you who've had that experience, would you mind to explain some of your challenges that you experienced interacting with those people? And again, you can put your answer in the chat box. Or if you want to raise your hand, do the electronic raise hand, click the icon at the bottom of your screen, then we can get you to be unmuted and you could speak your answer to this question. So either put something in the chat box or you can ask to be unmuted. Okay, and I'm reading from the chat. I got one response that said, I felt that although I accomplished the goal of the contact, I wasn't able to provide the same level of customer service as usual. Okay, interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Here's another one. The response says, not getting a direct response right away, and the response was not what I asked for. Thank you. Anything else? Does anybody have anything else they want to add? This is Donna. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead. Eugene, will you click, please? Okay, so these bullets are some very common experiences of people who have hearing loss and their encounters with law enforcement or traffic safety professionals. When you are doing a test for DWIs, a lot of deaf people have balance problems, whether or not they are intoxicated. That is a very natural part of hearing loss. And so that person might already have balance issues. And that's related to the fluid in their inner ear. And when that fluid is at an unnatural state, it can cause balance issues. So just to let you know, if you asked me to do a balance test, I would actually fail, even if I had not had a drop of alcohol in my system. The next bullet point, when people are expecting those with hearing loss to be able to lip read, maybe they can't. Some of that is because maybe the lighting is poor, there's a bright light behind the officer, or the officer is shining a flashlight in the person's face. That frequently happens in the evening. The flashlight is right on the person's face. You know, the officer comes up, shines a light in the car, and the deaf person cannot see the officer who is trying to ask a question. Deaf and hard of hearing people have experienced where hearing people take over and answer the question to the officer instead of letting the person with hearing loss answer for themselves. So that is not appropriate. The question was addressed to the person with hearing loss, and they should be given the opportunity to answer for themselves. On that next point, some people think, oh, hearing loss, they should not be able to speak clearly, but many people with hearing loss, especially those who have hard of hearing, do speak very clearly. And so they have experienced times when a law enforcement professional doesn't believe that they have hearing loss and then doesn't provide the appropriate accommodation. Also, if it's a scene of an accident, frequently people with hearing loss are the very last person to be interviewed. Everybody gets asked questions first and addressed first, but then they leave the person with hearing loss to the very end. And that can be very, that's like putting somebody down because they are frequently left to last. And then sometimes they have the experience where officers have some basic sign language skills, and that's a wonderful encounter. People with hearing loss who know American Sign Language are always thrilled when they encounter somebody who tries to use their own language with them. But it is important to recognize the level of your signing. If you are not a skilled signer, you still need an interpreter, because if you just try to rely on basic skills, then that can be very frustrating to the person with hearing loss. All right, next slide, please. Thank you.
On this slide, both Martina and I work for this division, so it gives you a little bit of our structure. We have a home office, which is our administrative office, which is based in Raleigh. That's where my office is located. We also have 7 regional centers that serve all 100 counties throughout the state. And I will, after this slide shortly, will show you the counties and their breakdown by catchment area. We do provide free, no-cost consultation and trainings. We are happy and willing to travel anywhere you ask. You are welcome to meet with us at any point in time. And at this time, I'll let Martina tell us a little bit more about our division. Next slide, please. And as I just mentioned, there is a map here on your screen that shows our division of the Division of Services for Deaf and Hard of Hearing regional centers broken down. We have a center in Asheville, Morganton, Charlotte, Greensboro, Raleigh, which is where Martina's office is located and where our central office is located. Then we have Wilson and Wilmington. At the bottom of this slide is a URL where you can click and open up each slide, and it will take you to the contact information for each regional center. It will tell you which counties they serve, as well as their point of contact for each of the positions. So look for your county and then reach out to the appropriate specialist. Next slide, please. Here are some general demographics of the population of those with hearing loss in North Carolina. Statewide, there are approximately 1.2 million people with a hearing loss, which is about 16.2% of the population. And the hearing loss is from mild to profound. It is expected to increase, this number is expected to increase by 35% by the year 2030. A majority of the population we serve is about 30% of this 1.2 million, which is ages 65 to 75. And then 46% are over the age of 75. Some of you may wonder why the population is a higher age. And that's because North Carolina is a retirement state. A lot of people are moving here. People are here on vacations. We've got baby boomers who are starting to become of age, and their hearing is suffering because of their age. We have people who might have lost their hearing from a work environment and overexposure to noise. Maybe they've attended loud concerts and damaged their hearings. There's a variety of causes of hearing loss that can account for these numbers. We also have veterans who are returning from some sort of active duty or war conditions, and we see that as at about 63% of the people who come back that return from war who have a hearing loss. That's the number one condition that they return with, the number one disability. After this training, you will receive a copy of this PowerPoint, so do not worry. And we will also be including the statistics of people with hearing loss per county for you. So we'll ensure that you have that so you can get an idea of the numbers that are in your area, and it might increase or decrease the likelihood that you'll run into someone who has a hearing loss. The demographics are still good. These are numbers that we've had since 2015. And again, we show the demographics broken down by population and age group. You'll receive that document at a later time. All right, next slide, please. At this time, I'll turn things over to Martina. This is Martina. Hi, everyone. Yes, this is more about how, when you're interacting with someone, how you can identify whether or not they have a hearing loss. Please do feel free to type comments in the chat if you don't mind. How do you think, what is one way or a few ways that you can identify someone who has a hearing loss? So go ahead and put your answers or thoughts in the chat. Right? I see one comment in the chat saying, if I see them signing, sure, great. What else? Yep. Pointing to their ears, gesturing, yep. Others? Come on, there's more out there. Right? They might not respond to your question appropriately, especially if they're not looking at you, they won't respond. Or not responding. I see another comment about not responding. Yep. Altered speech. Yes, that is something that could be an indication of hearing loss. All right, well, let's go ahead and reveal the answers. You guys got a lot of them. Thank you so much for your participation. Some of you did touch on some of the answers on this list. The most important takeaway is to also notice whether or not they wear hearing aids or cochlear implants, making sure that your face is visible. Make sure that sometimes even with hearing aids and cochlear implants, they're not always visible because their hair might be covering it, or they may be wearing some sort of head covering. Their hair might be in the way, or they may have a headpiece or something. And again, that altered, unclear speech is also an indicator sometimes. They may speak louder or softer than someone because they may not have their hearing aids in, or they might have their hearing aids in and they're not sure how loud or quiet the environment is. Some people don't wear their hearing aids as often as others. And so that may also impact the volume of their speech. We mentioned no response or inappropriate responses. You may see that person turning their head and moving closer to the sound. And then this one we see often. You might see a puzzled look or puzzled facial expression while they're trying to listen to you, and still yet may not be able to understand. They may shake their head, saying they don't understand, and shrug their shoulders. They may not detect or recognize any sounds, or they might only hear some of them. And they grow up, some people grow up not hearing, or those who do hear might not be able to discern what sounds are being made. Often, people with hearing loss experience frustration because of that lack of communication. So you may see more frustration in their gesturing and their communications towards you. And yes, we mentioned they might look at your lips. I speak and sign at the same time. So you might meet people who also have a hearing loss and might speak and sign at the same time. You may meet people who don't use their voice at all. And then lastly, another way to recognize is when they indicate they would like for you to write or type on your your cell phone or on a computer back and forth with them. All right, next slide. This slide is critical. This is our exposure to you of some sensitivity and knowing that these are some common misnomers and labels that are being used in the community today that are no longer acceptable. Hearing impaired, we still see and is used widely, but it implies a medical perspective rather than taking a whole person holistic approach and putting people first in this language. A wide majority of the deaf population do not like the word hearing impaired because it implies they are broken. All of these labels do indicate some sort of brokenness. The most common identities and proper terminology to use are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind or deafblind. Deaf mute and deaf and dumb are inaccurate terminologies and were once considered politically correct, but are no longer considered politically correct. And the term mute just means a person has no ability to speak whatsoever. When we hear the word or see or are called deaf and dumb, it implies that we are unintelligent. And all of these terms in and of themselves are insulting to our community. Handicap, again, is another outdated piece of terminology that the mainstream public decided was politically correct. And at this point and in these times are no longer acceptable. So again, the best way to identify us are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind. You may also still have people who say hearing impaired, but again, we don't consider ourselves impaired. We can do anything but hear. Next slide. Well, and this one, one more thing, even though it's not a label, it's often a mispronunciation. Just because the ending of deaf is so silent and it's hard to discern whether it's deaf or death. On the news, I've caught in the captioning where they've said a person is deaf. And I look and I found that odd reading it because it was so out of context. And it was just something that we see often in the speaking community where they do mispronounce the word deaf. So it's very important that you recognize and pronounce it correctly. Next slide. This is a summation of a lot of the things we did talk about. Basically, a one size does not fit all. People who live in North Carolina could fall into any of one of these categories and may need a variety or combination or only one of all of the accommodations you see on the right-hand side of this chart. The deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, and late deafened populations do have similarities in their communication needs. However, there may be those within who do not know sign language, who do not speak clearly. They may not identify culturally with one of these populations. And then you may have some who grew up with their first language being American Sign Language. Each one of them will have a variety of ways that you can accommodate them based on their hearing loss, whether that's mild, moderate to profound, or profound. I'm one of those who was born and raised oral, so you will see some deaf people who may not have learned to sign until later in their life. I didn't learn until I was well into my teens. People who are deafblind have a combination of hearing and vision loss. And those who are late deafened are those who already have developed a spoken language based on sound at some point in their life and became deaf later in their age based on a variety of reasons. It could have been a sickness. It could have been an accident. Something caused them to lose their hearing later after they've acquired language. Deafblind people do rely on tactile American Sign Language interpreters, which are interpreters that are specially trained to provide a different type of communication access that's called tactile, which is hand under hand. And again, any one of these communication methods could be utilized with any given population. Clear mask is also on our list. That is something that was provided at the onset of COVID. And that is something still used in the medical setting where you have a clear screen to see through so the person can speech read if needed. Next slide, please. And this slide goes on to Donna. This is Donna. Well, now that you've learned a couple of tools that are out there available to you to help you accommodate those with hearing loss successfully, we'd like you to share with us some best practices for communication with deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind people, now that you've had some hints given to you in the slide before. So go ahead and start throwing those in the chat for us.
This is Donna. Are there any answers? Anything you want to put in the chat box about some good basic communication tips? Or if you would like to raise your hand, and we can unmute you and you can speak your response. Okay, well, we'll just proceed. Eugene, will you click, please? Oh, this is Donna. Okay, I see some responses. Using correct terminology. Yes, make sure your face is clear of anything. That's great, very good. When you meet a person with hearing loss, it is always crucial to ask them what is going to be the most effective for them and let them tell you what accommodations they need, because it varies greatly based on the individual. So always ask them, make sure you are looking at the person directly, avoid having your back to bright light, because that makes it very hard to see your face. And if possible, minimize any background noise in your environment. And that is very common for hearing people too. Even those with typical hearing say, I can't hear you, the background's too noisy. So just do the best you can and try to make the situation as feasible as possible for clear hearing. So speak slowly and clearly, but do not exaggerate. And sometimes you might need to get closer to somebody. But if you're walking, somebody might actually ask that you stay so that they can speech read you and not worry that you're going to get too close to their face. So it's best to keep a distance, a personal bubble, so that you can see each other's faces clearly while you communicate. So don't be too close up to somebody, because that morphs your mouth movements. And please don't shout at people. I don't like it when people shout at me. I can't hear you no matter how loud, but I can tell you're screaming, and it's very upsetting. I've been deaf since I was a kid, and I would really appreciate it when people do not shout. So just in general, use your appropriate tone of voice and your appropriate speed of conversation. Also, try to focus on using very simple words, or repeat or rephrase what you're saying should the need be there. So you can simply rephrase a word from the sentence that they might be struggling with. You know, a lot of words look very similar on the mouth, and we have a speech reading demonstration in a moment that I think will show you that. Next slide, please. Some further communication tips. Feel free to use some basic gestures. That's totally fine and appropriate. Feel free to act it out. If you have some type of picture, or say you're talking about a cell phone, you can point to your cell phone or show it to them to give them context clues. You can also use personal amplifiers like a pocket talker, which Martina is holding up now. That helps increase the sound going into the person's ears through the headphones and the mic on the device. So you can always hand it to them. And even if they're a little hesitant, go ahead and encourage them to use it. Or if they hand you the microphone, please just accept it, because that's the accommodation they're asking for. And Martina mentioned earlier about using a black felt tin marker for writing notes. And you can use that not just for deafblind people, but also for deaf, because it makes what you're writing clear. I remember one time it was at night and somebody was writing a note to me and I could not see it at all because they were using a pen where the line was very thin. if maybe you are working specifically with a person who doesn't understand writing, or maybe they don't have any sight, you can use print on palm, which there's a picture on the slide demonstrating that. If you use POP, print on palm, they might actually use that back to you too. And that is typically seen in populations where people have no vision. And if you are deafblind, that means you have dual sensory loss, you have hearing loss and vision loss. Okay, let me make sure I didn't leave anything out. All right, next slide, please. Oh, fun. This is going to be a great exercise for all of you. We are going to gesturing. Gesturing is not the same as using American Sign Language, but gesture can be a way to communicate with a person with hearing loss. And also with people who don't speak English. You might need to rely on gesturing with that population as well. So next slide, please. I'm going to ask the sign language interpreter to read this slide. And I'm not going to sign it because I don't want to give anything away. This is the interpreter reading the slide. Can you gesture this? I stopped you because you drove fast and didn't stop at the stop sign. Your driver's license and registration, please. This is Donna. Thank you. So I am curious if we have any volunteers in the audience, perhaps one or two of you would like to request that your video be opened up so that you can gesture. And please remember, there's no right or wrong way. We just want to see some ideas and get some creativity flowing. So please raise your hand electronically or put a note in the chat box and the host will enable your video. And this is Martina saying, please, please, let's have some volunteers. We'd love to see your faces. And this is Donna. Ooh, okay. It looks like we do have a volunteer. Okay, great. Here she is.
I've added her as a spotlight now. She should be able to see. Okay.
Yes, I see you now. Wonderful. Okay, go ahead. Show us what you got.
Hi. You drove fast.
Yeah.
And stop at the stop sign. That's all I got.
Right. That's very good. Both presenters are saying that's good. Thank you so much for volunteering. This is Donna. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to give something? Give an example? Let's have maybe one more person. And I see Tracy is willing to volunteer if nobody else is.
Okay, Tracy, you've been added to the spotlight, so folks should be able to see you now.
Okay, so I stopped you, drove too fast, and you didn't stop. Your driver's license.
This is Donna. Thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate that. Okay, I appreciate both of your braveries. Thank you so much. And like I said before, there's really no right or wrong way to do this. The goal is just to try to get the information across. So thank you. With gestures, and as you're approaching somebody with hearing loss, it can feel very challenging. But like I said before, this can also be used with somebody who doesn't speak English. Gesturing is just a way we can use what's in our environment and some natural body language to communicate. Next slide, please. Okay, now we have a lip reading exercise, and I'm going to let Martina lead this one. This is Martina, and this is my favorite part of this presentation. And I'm hoping to see everybody get a perfect 5 out of 5. So I'm going to say some words and I want you to test your lip reading skills. I'm going to give you 2 tries. If you don't get it on the first try, I will repeat the word and there's going to be 5 words. So is everybody ready? Please get out a paper and pencil so you can write your answers down. And Donna and our interpreter are going to turn their video off so that my screen is as big as possible. Okay. Like I said, I have 5. The first word is, and I'm not going to use my voice. So here's the first word. Repeated it. Here's your second word. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. And that was it. Okay, I'll wait for my presenters to return to the screen. So now I'm just wondering how many of you got all 5? How many got their answers right? What do you think? Anybody got 5 out of 5? Oh, wait, let me back up. And I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Let me give you the answers first and then we'll see. Number 1 is stop. Number 2 was driver's license. Number 3, I said, are you hurt? Number 4, is gas leak. And number 5 was back light out. So your tail light was out. And I said backlight. So how many did you guys get right? Please put that in the chat box. I see 3 out of 5. Oh. Did anybody get 4? No one got 4 right. And Donna is recognizing that there are some answers in the chat box. We're seeing 3 out of 5, 2 out of 5. Okay. This is Martina. Great job. Thank you guys. So just imagine that you were in this high stress situation and none of you were able to get 5 out of 5. So if you're a hard of hearing person, it takes a lot of skill to be able to speech read, and only 30 to 40% of English words are actually visible on the lips. Some letters and some words look exactly the same. For example, if I say CD or UG, and there's another word like cat and sat, they look the exact same on the face. So without context, it is very easy to misunderstand. That's where using your gesturing can be very helpful. So sometimes people just end up changing the topic because they don't understand what's being said. But please don't give up when you're trying to communicate with somebody with hearing loss. Don't throw in the towel. Just try to change how you're phrasing something or change the method of communication and try to help people as much as you can. And they might not understand everything you say, but hopefully they'll get the gist. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. And we're gonna switch interpreters as we post this next poll.
In looking at the poll question says, are you familiar with the hearing loss logo on your driver's license? 75% of you were not familiar with that, which is fine. That's why we're here. Governor Cooper signed House Bill 84 into law back in 2017. This went effective in 2018. The premise for this law is that people who have hearing loss, whether they're deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, if they are drivers and have a driver's license, can voluntarily add this hearing loss designation symbol to be added onto their driver's license. If you look closely, we actually circled where that would be found on your driver's license or on that person's driver's license and blew up the icon. This is more or less a universal symbol for someone with hearing loss. Again, remember, this is voluntary. When someone does ask for this symbol to be placed on their license, they typically will see our agency for a verification of hearing loss. Just to verify that they do have some sort of hearing loss. We have a form that we provide them for them to take to the DMV, and then the DMV will put this into their system. So if they are stopped or there is something where their license has to be run through the system, then it will come up in the database that this person does have a hearing loss, and that should be able to help individuals know how to interact with this person. Now, it doesn't say what type of hearing loss or how they identify. It's just general hearing loss. Okay, but it should give you a heads up in a way that you might need to interact with this person. All right, next slide. I also wanted to show you a couple of cards that you may see deaf people carrying with them when you pull them. The card that you see on the top on this slide is an older version. The second one at the bottom is our more revised, updated, aesthetic version, but they both are essentially the same. They say the same thing. They have the same function. They just have a different look. You will typically see these cards being used during traffic stops if that person does happen to have a hearing loss. Usually, when the deaf community, hard of hearing community receives these cards, we explain to them at that time how they are also to use this card when they're being stopped. We explain that they need to make sure they have their driver's license and registration as well as this visor card available, but then have their hands on the wheel until the officer approaches the vehicle and asks them or gives them instructions. If they indicate they can't hear, they will then turn and grab their materials and give those to you. They may have checked on the back of the card that they're hard of hearing and say they use a particular communication modality. That might be ASL, it might be lip reading or speech reading, or it might be writing or some form of text-based communication. But essentially, this card lets you know what works best for them to be able to communicate with an officer on the scene. As Donna mentioned, there are those communication tips, and those tips are listed here on the card. For instance, one of them is do not put the light in their face, do not stand in front of something with bright lights behind you, that type of thing. So there are some other tips on this card that have seemed to be very helpful and met communication needs and prevented communication misunderstandings at the scene of an accident or traffic stop. So we want you guys to be aware this is floating around out there so you know what to do when you see it. Next slide. Here is another piece of printed material you may see being circulated, and it's a communication guide for law enforcement officers for working with deaf and hard of hearing individuals. It includes what I just mentioned. About the visor card. And this brochure is another helpful tool for you and for those who have hearing loss who are drivers. The goal for us to have these materials is to prevent any barriers in basic communication. We use pictures and visual aids for clarity, and there are pictures and icons throughout this brochure to ensure that law enforcement can use this with the deaf and hard of hearing community. You point at the pictures to identify what's needed. Maybe they only have the visor card, but they may not have the communication guide. So this is something that's good for you. If you go back to your car, you can grab this communication guide and point to whatever the incident might be. And again, the instructions are listed out. Please provide this. Which is your preferred method of communication? And each one of the sections of this brochure has been very clear and very helpful. I do want to emphasize this is not to be a substitute for an on-site sign language interpreter. If something goes awry in your communication, you do need to have a sign language interpreter on site. If you would like to order these brochures, you can email ncjabookstore@ncdoj.com or .gov, excuse me. These brochures were developed by the North Carolina Justice Academy with technical assistance and support from the Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Next slide. This is Donna. I know we're running short on time, so I will try to run through these slides pretty quickly. We only have a few slides left. Here are some resources available to you. We have the ADA guide. We've got communication aids and communication apps for you that you can access. And the last one is the First Responder Communication with Deaf and Hard of Hearing Citizens from Spokane, Washington. And this is a video that's showing an interaction between a deaf person and a law enforcement officer. Even though the video is a little outdated, the content is relevant. Next slide. I'll have 6 questions showing on the screen that are factors for consideration. I had wanted to go through each question individually, but I don't believe we'll have time for that. Again, there are no right or wrong answers here. This is just something to consider for your standard operating procedures, and maybe contacting your local legislative representative to talk about factors that can impact the safety of deaf and hard of hearing individuals and officers alike. I'll go ahead and have the questions come up on the screen just because we don't have time, and quickly run through them. So if you don't mind, go ahead and display all of the questions. And again, you all will have a copy of this presentation. But again, I recommend following your SOP, talking with legal representatives within your agency, and consider these factors when developing your protocol. Next slide, please. As we mentioned earlier, we have 7 regional centers that serve all 100 counties here in the state of North Carolina. When you go to this link, you will see a map, the map that I showed you, and you can click on the area of the state that coincides with your county. And then there will be a list of points of contact, and you can meet with each one of those individuals that you need and discuss how you can better serve those individuals. And again, the website does have our state broken down by county. Once you find your county, then look for the regional center and look for the community accessibility specialist for that county or for that regional center. You can either email them or call them. Next slide, please. And finally, here is my contact information as well as Martina's contact information. Please do feel free to reach out to either one of us if you have any questions after this presentation. With that, I think that's all we had. I guess we'll turn it back over to our host. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here for this presentation. I hope you all learned something. And again, as always, you can contact us and we'll be happy to come back next time. And this is Martina. I don't know if we have time left for questions. I'm not sure how Eugene would like to handle this, but are there questions at this point, Eugene?
I don't see any questions, but yes, we certainly have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. If attendees would like to either post a question in chat or raise your hand electronically, and I can activate your microphone.
Martina, no questions? This is Donna. Don't be afraid. You can ask any question you want. What questions do you have? There are no stupid questions. We're here to answer whatever questions you may have. So what questions do you have? The factors for consideration questions might be a question you want to talk about with me and Martina offline. We're happy to make time to do that with you just to help you with your SOPs. Or you can reach out to your specialist with this list of questions as well and talk to them about how to help you. Martina's in the Raleigh area and would be happy to meet with you as well. And this is Martina. One thing I would like to add just real quickly is for those of you who may be interested, we offer a training called Different World, which is a simulation activity. It gives you a glimpse of what it's like to be in our world for the day, where the roles are switched and you have the experience of being a deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind individual. This is typically a very impactful event and is beneficial for a variety of agencies who have experienced it. It is customizable, and we're happy to provide that. We'll reach out, or you can reach out to us and let us know how many participants, and we can make sure that we can provide that for you. This is Donna. I wanted to also piggyback off what Martina was saying. We are also in talks to set up a different world activity with Tracy. So I think you guys should be keeping an eye out for that. I did see something in the chat that came through just at the last minute here from Donnie Hedwin that says, I would like to see more in-depth training. I know my area does not have any. I encourage you to reach out with your regional centers at that link that I provided to our division and see if you can encourage your community accessibility consultant to provide local trainings for you. And then there's a comment here from Rita Hill asking, do you know if there are other similar departments for deaf and hard of hearing people in other states? If memory serves, I believe 32 states in the country have some sort of commission or dedicated office for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. I believe my assumption's correct. North Carolina is unique because we have 7 regional centers and we have specific specialists that target the populations that we serve. Our community accessibility specialists are basically one of a kind, where we work with law enforcement, first responders, and provide consultation and training to venues and law enforcement throughout the state. So North Carolina is one of the only states that provides this at the county level as well as on a statewide level, because my position is also a unique position. And this is Martina. There is one other event where I went somewhere else. I went to some other conference and they told me that they never had this type of level of engagement at an emergency management conference before. They had never seen anyone at the North Carolina Emergency Management Association conference, that they had never had a consultant that worked with the deaf and hard of hearing individuals. Our community accessibility consultants work in all types of venues. Law enforcement is one of them, but we also work in legal, theatrical, and community venues to ensure that communication access is provided for all of our North Carolinians.
Well, this is Eugene. I want to thank you all very much for the comments, for the questions, and especially to Donna and Martina for your excellent presentation today. I will note that Tracy posted in the chat information about the different world training that Martina had mentioned. We are currently coordinating with them on setting up that training, and information will go out. If you have not already signed up to receive emails on North Carolina Traffic Safety Conference and related trainings, please use that URL in the chat. And if we were unable to answer any questions, or if you have additional questions soon, you can post them in chat before you exit, and we'll try to get an answer for you. And also feel free to use chat to suggest any improvements to the webinar series or future topics you'd like to learn more about. Following today's webinar, as I mentioned earlier, you will receive an email with the recording link as well as PDFs of the presentation slides. So be sure to watch for this email coming soon. The email will also include a link if you would like to request a participation certificate for your training records. So again, use the link in the email that you received to request that certificate, and that certificate will be emailed to you. I will note, if you happen to be watching the recording of this webinar and not the live webinar, we're only able to provide certificates for participants in the live webinar. We invite you to join us again for other traffic safety webinars planned for this series. We have one more scheduled for this fiscal year. So please visit the traffic safety website on the URL on the screen for information on upcoming trainings. You'll also find links to the recordings on that same page. And of course, at that website, you'll also find information about the next North Carolina Traffic Safety Conference and Expo, which will be in 2024. We do hope you'll plan to attend that conference. And that's all for today. And again, thank you very much for participating, and goodbye for now.
This is Donna and Martina. Thank you so much. Nice to partner with all of you.